let's talk about grief. It's heavy, it's hard, it's challenging, and it can suck you in. So today I want to share some key insights that I've learned from navigating grief from 20 years of transformational work, being a monk for the last 8 years, and supporting others through this successfully for many, many times. I learned this, it all came online about 3 years ago when my father died. He was diagnosed with cancer, and we thought that he was going to engage in treatment, and he did for a few weeks, and then the treatment really didn't work. And he had a pivotal appointment with his doctor where the doctor said, listen, you can do about 3 months. That might give you about 6 months, but the 3 months is going to be hell. You're going to be really uncomfortable, and hopefully it'll give you 6 months. And he looked at him, he thought about it for a second, and he said, I've lived a good life. And my mom and my dad started crying, and it was a choice that he made, a conscious choice that he made. My mom called me because my dad couldn't really talk about it. He was very moved and sad and had a really hard time talking about his emotions, even though he had a big heart and cared about us a lot. And she told me, and it was shocking. It was shocking because this figure in my life that had been there for how many years? 43 years of my life was suddenly disappearing. And I took the opportunity to call him, but he couldn't really talk about it. So I just shared how much I loved him and cared about him. And I would send him texts in my job about how I'd had a great day and was thinking about him all day and was grateful for how he had taught me these values of giving back to other people and helping people and being selfless. And, he really helped mold me into the person that I am. And so I chose to, and this was natural for me at this time, and it wouldn't have been after, many 10 years ago or something. But I chose to embrace feeling grateful. And it wasn't like I didn't feel sad, because I did. And it was, I would say, devastating on a level. And what I did that was really helpful is I channeled that sadness into gratitude. And I expressed that gratitude out into the world. And again, I think that I would have struggled a lot more with that major loss in my life as a figurehead if I would have resisted feeling the pain and the sadness and the loss of it all. Instead, I had brought it into my work, not like I talked about it, but I brought a certain tenderness into my work and a softness that into my work. Now, I had also trained myself to be living a vulnerable way in, again, the appropriate context with the appropriate people. But I don't want this to sound like condescending or trite or anything, but it went well, per se. Now, it was painful and I was sad, but God, it was tender. And I remember a lot of people reaching out to me and saying, I'm so sorry for your loss. And it was really sweet of so many of our family and our friends and my community reaching out to me. At the same time, I was just overcome by gratitude for what I had received from him. A few weeks passed and he decompensated a lot faster than we had thought. And we were all sitting around him in hospice, and his body was dying, and he had what I guess is called the death rattle. And he was breathing very heavily, and his body was dying, and he had stopped eating, and he could kind of barely communicate. But there was this really touching moment that I'll share with you, where one evening, it was the last night he spent in the house actually, and I slept on the couch across from him in this bed that we had made in the living room because he couldn't walk up the stairs anymore. And he was like trying to get out of bed and go to the bathroom, and he was kind of incoherent. He was on a lot of pain meds. And I went over and I helped him, and we walked to the bathroom together, and I helped him go to the bathroom, and I started crying and he started crying, and we kind of chuckled a little bit at the kind of humor of the moment of me helping him go to the bathroom, and then we kind of just laid on the floor, and I just held him like a baby. And it's something I'll never forget, actually. And I just held him, and he fell asleep in my arms, and it was this full circle moment of, what he had given to me. And I had these memories of how I'd fall asleep on the couch. He would carry me up to my bedroom and tuck me in. And all these beautiful moments, and it had really come full circle. So all this to say, yes, it was painful. I don't want to sound insensitive, especially to my family, my sister and my mother. And it was painful, but it was also so graceful. And when I look back on that, I think it's because I chose to surrender to the sadness and cry when I needed to cry, and just naturally focused on gratitude. So these are the keys, right? One of them is channel your sadness into gratitude. It does something that I can't even really describe to you in this moment, that I think it's because gratitude activates our heart. And when we're in our heart dissolves pain. When we're in our heart. Now, it feels like when we're in our heart, I think in the short term that it's painful and it's brutal, and it feels like it's never going to stop. But the more that we give ourselves to the experience in our heart, and not like force gratitude, like white grip it or white knuckle it, the more that we allow ourselves to give ourselves to the gratitude that's there for us, the more that the grief can move. And it's not going to go away. I mean, it takes, in the world of psychology, we talk about the first year being the hardest. Why? Because we go through all these milestones in the first year that, like, they're not around. This person isn't there. They're always there. Like my dad's birthday, my parents' anniversary, Christmas, the winter holidays, Thanksgiving. Even now it's 4 years later, and I think of him whenever I have this kind of like techie insight. We used to talk about that stuff, or politics. We'd talk about what was going on, and humor. He was an actor in college, and he had a great sense of humor. Literally to almost the day he died. So there are moments when his memory comes up, and I get sad. But again, there's something about being in the heart and embracing it that allows it to not be painful long term, right? So that's one of the keys: is focus and bring all of your feelings into gratitude and see what kind of experience that gives you. A second one is share. Bring these feelings into the appropriate people, to the appropriate relationships that you know, that you trust, and talk about what's going on for you, right? Talk about the pain. It's so complex, and it's not linear, right? There are all these different stages of grief, like bereavement, denial, anger, what I would call as resistance, right? That makes it so complex, and there are so many feelings. And the second key is to allow yourself to feel all of them when they come, and then share them with the appropriate people. Emotion is energy in motion. Emotion is energy. And the more that we can give that energy room to move through us, emotion, the more that it will move, and the more that we can return to that place of centeredness, a place to where we are and moving forward and becoming the next version of ourselves. Another part of this insight around allowing emotion is that we will become a better, more evolved, more mature, more service-oriented person the more that we allow this grief to reinvent us. One of the reasons I think people really struggle with grief sometimes is that we resist becoming the next version of ourselves. And I've talked about this before in other videos. There is a gift inside of suffering, and grief can bring up a sense of suffering for us. And if we allow I don't want to say embrace the suffering, but we allow the suffering to bring certain gifts of experiences, emotional experiences, to our awareness, we will become a different person on the other side of that. We'll evolve, actually. We'll grow. And every grief that I've experienced, whether it was a breakup or an end of a certain aspect of my life, like it actually, when I became a monk, there was a certain process of grief, albeit it was brief because I was so jubilant actually at that time. But there was a moment when I had to grieve a certain way of being. Like I wasn't going to be able to eat meat anymore. I wasn't going to be able to be in a romantic relationship, i.e. have sex. I wasn't going to be able to drink alcohol or have drugs. I wasn't doing a lot of that at the time anyway. But there was a certain kind of it was brief, but there was a loss there for me. And when I embraced it and looked ahead and it just felt so good, then the grief, it didn't matter so much. Now, this is different when we lose a loved one, right? So there's some key distinctions here. But there's always, whenever we lose something, there's a grief. And the more that we can, again, not embrace it, but allow it to be there without holding on to it, allow it to move through us, and where we welcome the next aspect of our life. And it's a practice, because it's hard to welcome a certain newness when the newness is painful because there's a gap inside of it. But that gap is the unknown, and we don't actually have to fear the unknown. I can tell you, because I've been practicing this for 20 years and helping other people practice for 20 years, that on the other side of that suffering is something glorious. And when we welcome it and when we start to shift our belief system that the unknown isn't dangerous or unsafe or painful and that it actually can be great because it's another version of ourselves that is in the unknown, then boy, our whole life is waiting there for us. So there are those 2 keys there waiting for you. I hope you enjoyed this. Like there, subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. All my best to you.